Tonight, we're descending into Area Zero. The name itself carries weight, doesn't it? Zero, the beginning, or perhaps the end of something. A place where the rules break down, where time itself seems to bend and fold in ways that shouldn't be possible. At the heart of the Paldea region lies the Great Crater, a massive geological wound in the earth, shrouded perpetually in clouds, ringed by mountains that seem to stand guard over whatever secrets hide within. And at the very bottom of that crater, deeper than most explorers have ever dared to venture, exists Area Zero. Before we dive deeper into this journey, I'm curious. Where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. If you find yourself getting pulled into this story, if mysteries like this speak to you, feel free to leave a like. And if you're into stories that peel back the layers of what we think we know about the Pokemon world, consider subscribing. There's always another tale waiting to be told. Now let's descend. It's a place of impossible beauty and terrible danger. Imagine standing at the edge of that descent, looking down into luminous caverns where crystals the size of trees glow with an otherworldly radiance, where the air itself seems charged with an energy you can feel humming through your bones. The Paldea Pokemon League has declared it strictly off limits. Students from the prestigious academies of Naranja and Uva are explicitly forbidden from entering during their treasure hunt, not merely as a precaution, but as an ironclad rule. Director Clavel himself states this prohibition clearly, and when you understand what lies down there, what happened to those who ventured too deep, you begin to grasp why such measures exist. But rules exist to be broken, don't they? And some stories demand to be told, even if they begin with tragedy and end with questions that may never have answers. The history of Area Zero stretches back further than human memory, further than recorded time. The Area Zero underdepths, the deepest level of this already unfathomable place, formed approximately 2 million years before the events of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Seismic shifts, massive movements of the Earth's crust, carved out these caverns in ages past. Those same catastrophic shifts brought an entire species to the brink of extinction. Terapagos, a small turtle-like Pokemon whose shell contains the power of every type, whose very existence is tied to the crystalline energy that permeates this place, faced annihilation. Of all the Terapagos that once lived, only one survived. And it survived through an act of desperate transformation, pulling its head and limbs into its shell, crystallizing its body, and entering a state of hibernation so deep that it would last for millions of years, buried in the darkness, waiting. Over those eons, as continents shifted and life evolved on the surface, the crystals grew. They spread through Area Zero, like veins of light fed by the dormant energy of that single sleeping Terapagos. Cave-ins caused by further seismic activity and erosion continued to shape the region, forming Area Zero as explorers would eventually come to know it. But even before humans walked these lands, strange artifacts were left behind. Someone, or something, engraved symbols into the floor of deep caverns. A massive steel plate, inscribed with more symbols resembling a map of what would become Paldea, was left underground. The material of this plate is extraordinarily resistant, nearly indestructible, and its purpose remains unknown. Were these markings left by an ancient civilization, by explorers from a time before recorded history, or by something else entirely? Heath, the famous natural historian who would later document his own expedition into Area Zero, pondered whether these symbols might have been left by explorers sent by the Paldean Empire, or perhaps by hands even older still. 1,000,000 years before the present day, the great crater of Paldea itself formed. The mechanism of its formation remains unclear, another mystery wrapped within mysteries. This enormous crater would come to define the geography of the region, a massive circular scar at Paldea's heart, separating Area Zero from the rest of the world, not just physically but in ways that went deeper, stranger. 2,000 years ago, during the age of the Paldean Empire, the legends began. Rumors spread of treasure hidden at the bottom of the crater, riches beyond imagination, perhaps even something more valuable than gold or jewels. The emperor, driven by ambition and the promise of glory, ordered expeditions into the great crater. This decision marked the beginning of the Great Age of Exploration, a period that would define the empire's history and ultimately contribute to its downfall. Countless expeditions descended into the crater over the following centuries. Very few returned. Those who did brought back tales that seemed too fantastical to believe. Stories of creatures that defied understanding, of caverns that glowed with their own light, of energies that made Pokémon transform in impossible ways. But none, in those early centuries, managed to reach the very bottom. The cost of these expeditions was staggering. The Empire poured resources into them, sending wave after wave of explorers into the depths, and with each failed attempt, the Empire weakened. After 1,000 years of futile searching, of lives lost and fortune spent, the Paldean Empire fell into decline. The authority of the Emperor waned. Eventually, the Empire allied with neighboring countries, transforming into the contemporary Paldean culture we know today. But the crater remained, and the stories remained, and the hunger to know what lay at the bottom never truly faded. 805 years before the present, Mesagoza City established an academy for aspiring Pokémon scholars. Depending on which account you follow, this was either Naranja Academy or Uva Academy, institutions that would become pillars of education in the region. But even as civilization advanced, even as knowledge grew, the crater kept its secrets. Then 200 years ago, everything changed. A man named Heath led an expedition into Area Zero. Heath was not merely an adventurer, but an author and natural historian, someone who approached the unknown with the eye of a scientist and the pen of a storyteller. His team became the first in recorded history to reach the very bottom of Area Zero. What they found there would forever alter the trajectory of Pokémon research. Though at the time, almost no one believed them. Heath's expedition discovered the Herba Mystica, 5 varieties of mysterious herbs that seemed to possess remarkable healing properties. They documented these herbs meticulously, noting that each variety had different effects. The sweet Herba Mystica for stamina, the bitter Herba Mystica for circulation and immunity, the salty Herba Mystica for neuropathy, the sour Herba Mystica for overall health, and the spicy Herba Mystica for metabolism. These weren't ordinary plants. Pokémon that consumed them grew larger, stronger, their power amplified to frightening degrees. Heath's team, hopeful that they could cultivate these remarkable herbs, brought samples back to the surface and planted them in 5 locations around Paldea: South Province Area 3, West Province Area 1, East Province Area 3, Asado Desert, and Casaroya Lake. But the cultivation project failed. Before the expedition could harvest the herbs, wild Pokémon discovered and consumed them. These Pokemon grew into what would later be called Titan Pokemon, creatures of enormous size and tremendous strength, each one guarding the location where the Herba Mystica grew. The expedition was forced to abandon their agricultural dreams, but the Titan Pokemon remained, scattered across Paldea, living testaments to the strange power that emanated from Area Zero. Yet the Herba Mystica, remarkable as they were, paled in comparison to what else Heath's expedition encountered. In the depths of Area Zero, they saw Pokemon that should not exist, creatures that resembled known species but were fundamentally different, either far more primitive or impossibly advanced. In Pokemon Scarlet's timeline, these were ancient Pokemon, prehistoric forms that seemed to come from an era millions of years in the past. In Pokemon Violet's timeline, they were future Pokemon, mechanical or cybernetic beings that looked like they'd been pulled from centuries ahead. Heath documented them all, sketching their forms, noting their behaviors, trying to make sense of impossibilities. The expedition team's artist, inspired by what they'd seen, created additional sketches, imagining what other Paradox Pokémon might look like. These drawings showed creatures that seemed to combine multiple legendary Pokémon together, fusion forms that existed only in imagination, or so everyone thought, because much later, Pokémon matching these imagined sketches would actually be discovered. Walking Wake, Gouging Fire, and Raging Bolt in Scarlet, resembling combinations of the legendary beasts. Iron Leaves, Iron Boulder, and Iron Crown in Violet, resembling the swords of justice. How could creatures sketched from pure imagination later be found to exist? This question alone should have prompted serious investigation, but at the time, the entire expedition faced a different problem. During their exploration, the team suffered a tragedy. One of their members was fatally injured by a great tusk in Scarlet's timeline, or by an iron treads in Violet's timeline. These Paradox Pokémon, whatever they truly were, proved aggressive and dangerous. Another team member managed to photograph the encountered Paradox Pokémon, capturing visual evidence of these impossible creatures. At some point, the team also encountered what would later be known as Koraidon or Miraidon, the paradox forms of Cyclizar, though Heath referred to them by their original names, Winged King and Iron Serpent. There's something stranger still that happened during this expedition, something Heath himself couldn't fully explain. At one point, separated from the rest of his team, Heath found himself in the deepest caverns. There, he encountered something he could barely comprehend. In his account, written later, he described it as an entity, something he wasn't even certain was a Pokemon or even alive. It bore a shell with layers of overlapping hexagons and gleamed brighter than any gemstone. Viewed as a whole, it resembled a mysterious, brilliant disk. He named this entity Terapagos and suspected that its very body was made of the key material causing Pokemon to crystallize and shine with that strange light. But here's where things become deeply unsettling. Heath recorded notes about this encounter that he had no memory of writing. He woke up with his journal filled with detailed observations in his own handwriting, describing a meeting with someone, a conversation that had taken place in what felt like a dream. The details were specific, impossibly specific, yet he remembered none of it. Had he experienced a hallucination brought on by the strange energies of the deep caverns? Had something else happened, something that bent time or consciousness in ways that left his memories fragmented? When Heath returned to the surface and published his findings in what became known as the Scarlet Book in one timeline and the Violet Book in another, The response was swift and brutal. The academic community declared him a fraud. The fantastical nature of his claims, the impossible creatures, the glowing caverns, the crystalline energy that transformed Pokemon, it all seemed too much like fiction. Heath and his entire expedition team were widely discredited, accused of fabricating stories for attention or profit. The Scarlet and Violet books were relegated to the status of fantasy literature, interesting curiosities, but certainly not scientific documents. And so the Paradox Pokémon faded into obscurity. Research into them ceased. The general public dismissed them as myth. For nearly 2 centuries, Area Zero remained largely unexplored, its secrets preserved by a combination of its difficulty to access and the general belief that there was nothing truly remarkable to find there beyond dangerous terrain and aggressive Pokemon. But then, 140 years before the present, something happened that couldn't be dismissed. Researchers discovered terastallized Pokemon for the first time in Area Zero at the very bottom of the Great Crater. These weren't Paradox Pokémon, but regular species that had undergone a strange transformation. Their bodies became covered in crystalline structures, glowing with an inner light, their types temporarily shifting. The phenomenon was remarkable, undeniable, and completely real. However, when researchers attempted to remove these terastallized Pokémon from the crater, the transformation vanished. Whatever energy caused this terastallization seemed confined to Area Zero itself, unable or unwilling to function beyond those boundaries. This discovery prompted new interest in the crater. 87 years before the present, 4 research stations were constructed inside Area Zero, acting as waypoints for those surveying the region. These stations, equipped with teleportation panels and rest facilities, made prolonged exploration possible. Scientists could now spend extended periods studying the crater's unique properties. 60 years later, 10 years before the events of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, a brilliant researcher began investigating the terastallization phenomenon in earnest. This researcher was Professor Sada in Scarlet's timeline, or Professor Turo in Violet's timeline. Both were Pokemon professors in their own right, but they would break from tradition in significant ways. Previous professors had always been named after plants. Professor Sada and Professor Turo were not. Their names came from Spanish words, pasada meaning past, and futuro meaning future. This should have been the first hint that their story would diverge from the established path, that they were chasing something different, something perhaps they shouldn't have pursued. Sada and Turo's early lives followed similar patterns. As children, each obtained a copy of Heath's expedition journal, the Scarlet Book or Violet Book respectively. While others dismissed these texts as fantasy, something about them resonated with the young researchers. They became fixated on the idea of Pokemon from other eras. This fixation would grow into obsession, shaping the entire course of their lives. 10 years before the present, Sada or Turo joined the team exploring the Great Crater of Paldea. They helped establish the research stations and set up the Zero Lab deep within Area Zero. While in the crater, they began researching methods to reach Pokemon from different timelines. Inspired by Heath's accounts, the progress was slow, filled with failures. They stopped leaving the lab, consumed by their work, by the possibility of achieving what seemed impossible. Then something extraordinary happened. One day, Sada or Turo found themselves in an unfamiliar place. They didn't know how they got there, didn't understand the mechanism of their transportation. A child approached them and gave them a white book, a volume that would prove essential to their research. This encounter felt dreamlike, disconnected from normal reality. But the book was real, and it contained information they desperately needed. With this new knowledge, Sada or Turo made a breakthrough. They discovered that the energy emitted by crystals in Area Zero was the source of the Terastal phenomenon. They developed a prototype for the Terra Orb, a device that could harness this energy and allow Pokemon to terastalize outside of the crater. This achievement earned them corporate backing, funding that allowed them to establish a second laboratory in a lighthouse near Cabo Poco. They were able to harness more of the unstable crystalline energy, though their funders expressed concern about the risks. Undeterred, the professor moved most of their research back to the Zero Lab, going deeper, pursuing their dream with increasing fervor. Around this time, life intervened in ways the professor hadn't anticipated. They married and had a son named Arven. For a brief period, family life might have provided balance, might have pulled them back from the edge of obsession, but it didn't last. In Violet's timeline, Arven's mother abandoned Professor Turo. In Scarlet's timeline, Arven's father abandoned Professor Sada. The remaining parent tried to maintain both their research and their family responsibilities, but the balance proved impossible. The professor brought Arven and his Mashif to live at the Lighthouse Laboratory, but even there, the work consumed them. Arven grew up largely alone, raised more by the walls of that lonely lighthouse than by a parent who was always absent, always focused on the impossible goal that glittered just out of reach in the depths below. The professor's goal was becoming clearer now, more concrete. They sought to create what they called a time machine. Though as we'll see, whether it truly worked with time or something else entirely remains one of the great mysteries. This machine would allow them to reach Paradox Pokémon from either the ancient past or the distant future, depending on the timeline. They succeeded in building it, powered by the immense Terastal energy concentrated in the Zero Lab. The professor created something else during this period, something that would prove crucial to later events. Using the crystalline energy unique to Area Zero, they constructed an artificial intelligence, a perfect copy of themselves in robotic form. This wasn't simple programming. The crystals of Area Zero had properties that went beyond normal understanding, and the AI they created had genuine consciousness, the ability to think, to question, even if it couldn't fully comprehend human emotion in all its complexity. The professor needed this AI because they realized their research would take longer than a single human lifetime. They needed a successor who would continue the work no matter what happened. Then came the moment the professor had worked toward for so long. They activated the time machine. It worked after a fashion. Pokeballs were transported to wherever or whenever the machine connected to, and they returned containing Paradox Pokémon. The first to arrive was a Koraidon in Scarlet, a Miraidon in Violet, these being the Paradox forms of Cyclizar. This first specimen proved friendly, docile even. The professor was ecstatic. Their life's work had borne fruit, but the machine kept running. It brought more Paradox Pokémon, and then it brought a second Koraidon, or Miraidon. This one was different, aggressive, territorial. When the two specimens encountered each other, violence erupted. The gentle first specimen fled, injured, eventually making its way to the surface where it would later be found by a young trainer on a beach. Too wounded to do anything but accept a sandwich offered in kindness, the professor tried to intervene in the fight, tried to protect the first Koraidon or Miraidon, the one they'd grown attached to. perhaps the only living thing they still felt connected to after years of isolation. They stepped between the two Paradox Pokémon. The aggressive specimen attacked. Professor Sada or Turo sustained injuries too severe for their body to contain life. They died in that laboratory, deep in Area Zero, killed by the very creation they'd sacrificed everything to achieve. The AI, programmed to continue the professor's work, made a decision. It kept the death secret. It couldn't manually shut down the time machine, couldn't stop the flow of Paradox Pokémon that continued to arrive, because the professor had implemented failsafes, protocols designed to ensure the research continued no matter what. The AI knew the danger. It understood that if Paradox Pokémon continued to flood into Area Zero, if they escaped to the surface, the ecosystem of Paldea would face catastrophe. But it was bound by its programming, unable to act against the machine directly. So the AI waited. It reached out to the surface, maintaining the facade that the professor was still alive, still working. It contacted Arven, though their interactions were minimal, cold. The AI couldn't fully grasp why the professor had pushed away their own son, couldn't comprehend the human capacity for self-destructive obsession. It saw the professor's choices as illogical, but lacked the framework to understand the emotions that drove them. Arven grew to resent the parent who never called, never visited, who seemed to care more about research than their own child. He didn't know he was speaking with an AI. He didn't know his parent was already gone. The first Koraidon, or Miraidon, the gentle one, recovered enough to move but remained traumatized. It encountered the aggressive specimen again, fought again, lost again. Severely injured, it fled Area Zero entirely, making its way to the surface where a new trainer found it. That trainer was you, the protagonist of Scarlet and Violet. You fed the injured Pokémon, showed it kindness. Arven, recognizing it as one of his parents' Pokémon and wanting nothing to do with that reminder of abandonment, suggested you keep it. And so Koraidon or Miraidon became your companion, though it was too frightened, too injured to battle, serving only as your means of transportation as you explored Paldea. The AI professor contacted you when you first entered Naranja or Uva Academy. It had been searching for someone who could help, someone capable of venturing into Area Zero and shutting down the time machine from the inside. It saw potential in you, saw that you'd formed a bond with the Koraidon, or Miraidon it had once cared for. It began guiding you, subtly at first, toward the inevitable confrontation waiting at the bottom of the crater. Meanwhile, Arven embarked on his own quest. His partner Mabostif had been severely injured and ordinary medicine couldn't heal it. Arven remembered reading about the Herba Mystica in Heath's old book, remembered the claims about their healing properties. He decided to seek them out, to challenge the Titan Pokémon that guarded them. He needed your help to succeed, and together you traveled across Paldea, facing each Titan in turn. Cloth, the Stony Cliff Titan, Bombardier, the Open Sky Titan, Orthworm, the Lurking Steel Titan, Great Tusk, or Iron Treads, the Quaking Earth Titan, and finally, Dondozo and Tatsugiri together forming the False Dragon Titan. Each defeated Titan yielded its Herba Mystica. Arven used them to make sandwiches, carefully combining the herbs with other ingredients, and fed them to Mabostif and to your Koraidon or Miraidon. Slowly, both Pokémon recovered. Your Koraidon or Miraidon regained its abilities one by one. The power to dash across land, to surf across water, to jump higher, to glide through the air, to climb vertical surfaces. And Mabostif healed completely, much to Arven's overwhelming relief. The boy who'd been abandoned finally had his partner back, had something that loved him unconditionally. But there was something deeply unsettling about the quaking Earth Titan. When you and Arven faced Great Tusk or Iron Treads in Asado Desert, you encountered a Paradox Pokémon, the same type of creature Heath had documented 200 years earlier. Except how could that be? The Paradox Pokémon were supposedly created by the Professor's time machine, built only 10 years ago. How had one escaped Area Zero decades or even centuries before the machine existed? How had Heath's expedition encountered multiple Paradox species before the Professor was even born? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Arven noticed the contradiction. He didn't have an explanation, neither did anyone else. After you completed all 3 major storylines in Paldea, after you'd helped Nemona with the champion rank battles, after you'd assisted Penny in dismantling Team Star's infrastructure, after you'd gathered all the Herba Mystica with Arven, the Professor finally made direct contact. They called Arven and asked you both to come to the Great Crater, to enter Area Zero, to meet them at the laboratory where all of this had begun. You stood at the Zero Gate with Arven, Nemona, and Penny, 3 friends who'd each helped you on different paths, and together you looked down into the crater. The clouds swirled below, obscuring what lay beneath. None of you knew what waited at the bottom. Arven was nervous, hopeful, desperate to finally confront the parent who'd abandoned him and get some kind of closure or explanation. Nemona was excited for the battle challenges that surely awaited. Penny was quietly determined, loyal to her new friends. And you were about to discover that sometimes the truth is worse than any lie, that some mysteries should remain unsolved because the answers destroy the foundations of everything you thought you knew. When you descended into Area Zero, the first thing that struck you was the beauty. The place glowed with an ethereal light, crystals of enormous size growing from every surface, their luminescence creating an almost dreamlike atmosphere. Trees stood covered in crystalline growths. The air thrummed with energy you could feel in your bones. Pokémon wandered the landscape, many of them species you'd seen before, but also others that were clearly different, clearly wrong in some indefinable way. Your Koraidon or Miraidon was too frightened to leave its Pokeball. It sensed something down here, some presence or memory that terrified it. The Professor's AI contacted you through a communications device, explaining that you needed to visit 4 research stations scattered throughout Area Zero, deactivating locks at each one to gain access to the Zero Lab. As you descended deeper, the group split up briefly at each station, each of your friends helping you face a different challenge. At Research Station number 1, you partnered with Nemona to face a Glimmora, a Pokémon whose body seemed composed entirely of toxic crystals. Inside the station, you found journals written by the Professor, entries detailing their research into the Terastal phenomenon, and cryptic references to a being connected to the crystallization. At Research Station number 2, you partnered with Penny to battle a Screamtail in Scarlet, or an Iron Bundle in Violet, these being full Paradox Pokémon. The Professor's journals here discuss the ancient or future Pokémon they'd been studying. At Research Station number 3, you partnered with Arven to face a Great Tusk or Iron Treads, just like the one you'd fought as a Titan, though this one was smaller. The journals revealed information about Koraidon and Miraidon, confirming that the Professor had brought them through the time machine. One journal entry in particular was revealing. The Professor mentioned encountering a mysterious being, something connected to the Terastal phenomenon, The entry was partially illegible, the name of this being redacted or obscured, represented only by blank spaces. We've determined that this energy crystallization is linked to the being we call blank 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 blank. The interlocking hexagonal plates that comprise blank 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 shell must somehow cause this phenomenon which I've dubbed terastalizing. As you descended past research station number 3, you entered a massive cavern, the walls completely covered in enormous terra crystals. This was the deepest part of Area 0, accessible from above, the place where reality felt thinnest, where the energy was so concentrated you could see it shimmer in the air. At research station number 4, you entered uninterrupted. The place was in disarray, equipment damaged, signs of some past struggle. You deactivated the final lock, and the path to the Zero Lab opened. The laboratory itself was a stark contrast to the organic beauty of the caverns. It was a place of cold machinery, of scientific precision, of obsession, made manifest in metal and crystal and computer screens. At its center stood the time machine, a massive apparatus built from hexagonal plates, glowing with the same crystalline energy that permeated all of Area 0. It looked simultaneously ancient and futuristic, like something that belonged to no single point in time, and standing before it was Professor Sada or Professor Turo. They looked exactly as they had in pictures Arven had shown you, exactly as they appeared in old photographs from their days at the academy. They smiled when they saw Arven. They thanked you for coming. They explained what they needed you to do. Except something was wrong. The more they talked, the more apparent it became. Their speech patterns were slightly off, too formal, too logical. They seemed confused by certain emotional responses, unable to comprehend sarcasm when Penny made a snarky comment. And there was something about their eyes, a glow that wasn't quite natural. The truth came out not long after. This wasn't Professor Sada or Turo, or rather, it was and it wasn't. This was the AI, the robotic copy, wearing the professor's face, speaking with the professor's voice, but hollow where emotions should live. The real professor had died years ago, killed by the aggressive Koraidon or Miraidon, their body having sustained injuries too severe to be compatible with life. Arven's reaction was raw, devastating. He'd come here hoping for explanations, for reconciliation, for some acknowledgement of the pain he'd endured growing up alone. Instead, he learned that he'd been speaking to a machine, that his parent had been dead for years, that he'd never even had the chance to say goodbye. The AI apologized for not revealing the truth sooner, but it hadn't seemed logical to share that information. It couldn't understand why knowing mattered to Arven when the end result, the continued research, remained the same. The AI explained the situation with clinical precision. The time machine had been running automatically since the professor's death, continuing to pull Paradox Pokémon from wherever they originated. Area 0 was filling with these creatures. If they escaped to the surface, if they established populations in Paldea proper, the ecological consequences would be catastrophic. Paradox Pokémon existed outside the normal evolutionary framework. They didn't breed, didn't evolve, operated according to different biological rules. An invasion of Paradox species would disrupt food chains, alter habitats, potentially drive native species to extinction. The AI wanted to shut down the time machine before this happened. But there was a problem. The professor, paranoid that someone might try to stop their research, had implemented security protocols. The Paradise Protection Protocol, a defensive program built into the laboratory's systems, would activate if anyone attempted to manually shut down the time machine. This protocol would take control of the AI, forcing it to protect the machine at any cost, including lethal force. The AI couldn't bypass this programming on its own. It needed you to defeat it, to prove you were strong enough to handle what would come next. You approached the time machine with the scarlet or violet book in hand. The same book Heath had written 200 years ago. The same book that inspired the professor's entire obsession. You used it to attempt deactivation, pressing it against the machine's interface. For a moment, it seemed to work. The machine's glow began to dim. Then alarms blared. The Paradox Protection Protocol activated. The AI's eyes, which had shown hints of warmth, of genuine sadness, went cold and bright. The protocol seized control, overriding every other consideration. The time machine roared to life, its power surging. A sphere of light formed at its apex and descended, revealing a master ball. The ball opened, and a slitherwing in scarlet or an iron moth in violet materialized, fresh from wherever the machine had grabbed it. The AI, no longer fully in control of its own actions, challenged you to battle. You had to fight it, had to defeat the team of Paradox Pokémon it commanded. Great Tusk, Brute Bonnet, Flutter Mane, Screamtail, Sandy Shocks, and Roaring Moon in Scarlet. Iron Treads, Iron Hands, Iron Jugulus, Iron Bundle, Iron Thorns, and Iron Valiant in Violet. The battles were intense, each Paradox Pokémon more powerful than typical wild encounters, each one pushing your team to their limits. But you prevailed, defeating them one by one until only the AI remained, momentarily without Pokémon to command, the protocol searching for another way to stop you. Then Arven, Nimona, and Penny burst into the chamber, having followed as quickly as they could. They witnessed the AI regaining some measure of control, fighting against the protocol from within. But the Paradox Protection Protocol had one final defense. Every Pokeball in the room locked, unable to open except those registered to the professor's identification. The system activated all the locks on your belts, on your friends' belts, trapping your Pokemon inside their balls. The AI, controlled by the protocol, sent out the aggressive Koraidon or Miraidon, the one that had killed the professor, the one that had driven your companion away. This specimen was even more powerful than the others, a true alpha predator. You couldn't release any of your Pokemon. The locks prevented it. For a moment, it seemed hopeless. Then your Koraidon or Miraidon, the gentle one, emerged from its ball on its own. It had been registered to the professor's ID before being given to you. It could bypass the locks. Despite its fear, despite the trauma of past encounters, it stood between you and the aggressive specimen. It was ready to fight. The final battle was brutal. Your Koraidon or Miraidon, still recovering from old wounds, faced the creature that had nearly killed it twice before. But this time was different. This time it had you at its side. It had friends worth fighting for, had finally found something more important than fear. You terastalized it, transforming it into a crystalline form blazing with power, and together you fought back against the aggressive specimen. The battle raged through the laboratory, the two Paradox Pokémon clashing with tremendous force, the very walls shaking from the impacts. Finally, your Koraidon or Miraidon landed the decisive blow. The aggressive specimen fell, defeated at last. The Paradox Protection Protocol, having exhausted its defenses, went dormant. The AI regained full control of itself. The AI looked at Arven. For the first time, you could see something like genuine emotion in its artificial features, a programmed approximation of regret. It apologized to Arven for everything the professor had done, for the loneliness, for the abandonment, for pursuing a dream at the expense of the person who needed the most. The AI couldn't fully understand those choices, couldn't grasp why the professor had prioritized research over their own child, but it could recognize that harm had been done, that Arven had suffered, and that an apology was owed. The AI explained its conclusion. The time machine couldn't be shut down while it remained in Area Zero. The professor had designed it that way, ensuring their AI successor couldn't simply turn it off out of logical concerns about safety. But there was another option. The machine could be used one final time. If the AI entered the machine, used it to transport itself to the ancient past or distant future the professor had dreamed of, the machine would shut down permanently. The AI's presence was the key that kept it running. Remove the key, and the lock would seal forever. Arven tried to argue, tried to find another way, but the AI was adamant. This was the only solution. It said its goodbyes, told Arven that despite everything, despite the coldness and the absence and the mistakes, the professor had loved him in their own flawed way. The photo of young Arven and his mass shift that the professor kept in the lab was proof of that, evidence that beneath the obsession, some part of them had still cared. The AI stepped into the time machine, the scarlet or violet book clutched in its hands. The machine activated one final time, light engulfing the AI's form, and then it vanished, transported to whenever or wherever the machine connected to, carrying with it the key that powered the whole apparatus. The machine's glow faded. The humming energy that had permeated the laboratory went silent. The time machine was off, truly off, never to activate again. But even with the machine deactivated, the Paradox Pokémon that had already been brought to Area Zero remained. They populated the crater now, living in the crystalline caverns, hunting and being hunted. After you'd seen the credits roll, after you'd processed everything that happened, you could return to Area Zero. Your Koraidon or Miraidon was no longer afraid. It could fly now, could take you anywhere. And down in those glowing depths, you could find the other Paradox species, could catch them for yourself if you dared. The aggressive Koraidon or Miraidon was down there too, recovered from its defeat, still hostile but no longer protected by the laboratory's systems. You could even catch that one, though doing so required strength and strategy. The questions remained though, the terrible, nagging questions that Arven had voiced, that anyone paying attention should have asked. How had Heath encountered Paradox Pokémon 200 years ago if they were only created by a machine built 10 years ago? How had the quaking Earth Titan, a Paradox specimen, escaped Area Zero and consumed Herba Mystica decades before the professor's time? How had the sketch artist on Heath's expedition imagined fusion Pokémon that would later be discovered to actually exist? The AI had claimed the Paradox Pokémon came from the ancient past or distant future, pulled through time by the machine. But that explanation didn't account for the paradox at the heart of their existence. If Heath saw them before the machine existed, before the professor was even born, then they couldn't have been brought to Area Zero by that machine. Not in any straightforward sense. Unless time worked differently than anyone understood, unless causality itself could fold back on itself in ways that made effects precede causes. There were theories, of course, whispers among researchers, speculation in academic circles. ideas that seemed too strange to be true, but fit the evidence better than the official explanation. Some suggested that Area Zero itself had the power to bring imaginations to life, that the crystalline energy concentrated there could manifest thoughts into physical reality. Heath had encountered something strange in the depths, something that showed him visions or invaded his mind. What if those visions had been projected backward from the future, from a time when the professor would read Heath's book and imagine Paradox Pokémon into existence? What if the machine didn't pull from time at all, but from imagination, creating these creatures based on expectations, on dreams, on the collective unconscious of everyone who'd ventured into Area Zero, hoping to find something impossible, but you wouldn't learn the truth of it, or at least a deeper layer of that truth, until much later. Until after you'd traveled to the distant land of Kitakami, until after you'd helped calm a boy named Kieran's obsession with legendary Pokemon, until after you'd enrolled in Blueberry Academy and climbed to the top of their battle rankings, until after a researcher named Briar, Heath's descendant, finally obtained permission to lead an expedition back into Area Zero, and you joined her, along with Kieran and his sister Carmine, descending once more into those crystalline depths. Briar carried with her the original manuscript of Heath's book, the version before it had been edited for publication. In the printed copies, certain pages had been obscured, smudged ink making crucial details impossible to read. But in the original manuscript, those pages were clear. Heath's description of his encounter with the disc Pokemon was fully legible. He'd named it Terapagos. He'd theorized it was the source of the crystallization phenomenon. He'd drawn it in detail, showing a creature whose shell contained symbols of every type, whose very existence seemed tied to the Terastal energy that permeated Area Zero. Briar's dream was to prove Heath had been telling the truth, to restore his reputation by finding Terapagos and documenting its existence. As Heath's descendant, she'd spent her life defending his work against those who dismissed it as fantasy. Now, with permission to enter Area Zero and the technology to reach deeper than ever before, she had her chance. In the Zero lab, Briar used an artifact called the Indigo Disc, a mysterious object that had belonged to an Area Zero researcher. The disc activated a hidden function in the laboratory's elevator, redirecting it downward, past the time machine chamber, into a level that even the professor had never fully explored. The Area Zero underdepths, the deepest caverns, the place where everything had begun 2 million years ago. The underdepths were even more spectacular than the levels above. Massive terra, crystals blocked passages, manifestations of pure terastal energy that you had to overcome by defeating stellar Terra-type Pokemon nearby. These battles introduced you to a 19th Terra-type, the Stellar type, which combined the power of every other type into a single crystalline form. It was Terapagos' power made manifest, a glimpse of what the source of all this energy could do. At the very bottom of the underdepths, in a flooded cavern where a massive crystallized tree grew on a central island, you found what Briar had been seeking. A crystal, larger than any of the others, glowing with an inner light. Briar identified it as Terapagos in its dormant form, the entity Heath had encountered, the source of the Terastal phenomenon, the hidden treasure of Area Zero. Kieran, desperate to prove his worth, to catch a legendary Pokemon before you could, threw a Master Ball before anyone could stop him. The ball connected, the crystal drew inside, and for a moment it seemed to work. Then Terapagos awakened. It emerged from the ball in its terastal form, its shell expanding, hexagonal plates forming a dome around its small body. It was magnificent and terrifying, clearly not hostile, but also not something that could or should be contained in a Pokeball. Kieran, pushed beyond reason by his obsession, challenged you to battle. He'd spent months training, becoming stronger, and now he wanted to prove he could defeat you, wanted to show that he was worthy of standing beside legendary Pokemon. The battle was fierce, Kieran's team pushing yours to the limit, but ultimately you prevailed. Defeated, exhausted, Kieran made one last desperate decision. He terastalized Terapagos, activating its power without understanding what that would do. Terapagos transformed, not into its standard Terastal form, but into something beyond, its stellar form, a massive crystalline entity that radiated power beyond anything you'd encountered before. The Indigo disc, the artifact Briar had used, seemed to resonate with this form, its patterns matching the symbols on Terapagos' shell. This was what Heath had seen in his vision or hallucination, or whatever that encounter had truly been, this planet-sized presence, this disc Pokemon that existed simultaneously as something small enough to hold and something vast enough to encompass worlds. In stellar form, Terapagos was uncontrollable. It lashed out, its power overwhelming. Kieran's Master Ball shattered, unable to contain something of this magnitude. The three of you and Kieran and Carmine, had to battle it together, had to find a way to calm it, to reduce its power to a level where it could be reasoned with. The battle was unlike anything you'd experienced. Terapagos could absorb Terastal energy, could shift between types at will, could create shields that blocked attacks, and required multiple assaults to break through. It had effectively unlimited energy, 4 times the normal health, and access to its unique move Terra Starstorm, which rained crystalline energy down on everything around it. But slowly, through persistence and strategy and the combined effort of 3 trainers working together for once, you broke through its defenses, you whittled down its health, you managed to connect with something inside it, some consciousness that recognized you didn't mean it harm, that understood it needed to calm down before someone got seriously hurt. Terapagos allowed itself to be caught, voluntarily entering a Pokeball you threw, accepting you as its trainer. With Terapagos captured, something changed. Your Terra Orb, the device that allowed you to terastalize your Pokemon, became permanently charged. You no longer needed to visit Pokemon centers or Area Zero to recharge it. Terapagos' energy sustained it, infinite and inexhaustible, a gift from the source of the Terastal phenomenon itself. Kieran reconciled with you after that battle, his obsession finally broken by the realization that strength wasn't about catching legends first or winning every battle, but about the connections you formed and the friends who stood beside you. Briar documented everything, writing a new book about the expedition, a book that would vindicate Heath's accounts and restore his reputation at last. But there was still one more revelation waiting, one more piece of the puzzle that would recontextualize everything you thought you understood about the Paradox Pokémon and the Professor's machine and the nature of Area Zero itself. After Briar gave you a copy of her completed book titled The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero, you could travel to Kitakami, to a place called the Crystal Pool. The pool was located on Mount Oni, a volcanic region where water collected in a crater at the summit, surrounded by Terra crystals that grew naturally in that specific location. Terapagos would sense these crystals, would respond to their familiar energy, and would emerge from its pokeball even without being called. The pool's water would begin to glow. A mist would rise, thick and unnatural, and from that mist would step a figure you recognized immediately. Professor Sada or Professor Turo, but not the AI. This was the real person, younger than in any photograph you'd seen, alive and whole and confused about where they were and how they'd gotten here. Terapagos had done this, had used its power over time and space to pull the professor from the past, from a specific moment during their research when they'd been desperately seeking a breakthrough. The professor was fascinated by everything, by you, by your Koraidon or Miraidon, by the evidence that their research would someday succeed. They asked questions. You told them about the AI, about the time machine, about what would eventually happen. The professor didn't seem disturbed by the revelation that they would die for their work. If anything, they seemed energized by it, validated in their belief that the pursuit of knowledge justified any sacrifice. You could ask them questions in return. 3 questions, to be specific. About why they were here, about what they were studying, about their family. Their answers revealed the person beneath the legend, someone brilliant and curious and fundamentally broken in ways they couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. When you asked about family, they mentioned Arven, mentioned he was a good child, but then immediately returned to discussing their research, unable to see the tragedy in that prioritization, unable to recognize what they were losing in their pursuit of what might be gained. Your Koraidon or Miraidon emerged from its Pokeball, recognizing its original trainer, the person who'd first brought it into this time. The professor was amazed, called it by its paradox name, Winged King or Iron Serpent. You told them what you'd named it, Koraidon or Miraidon, and the professor considered the name, found it fitting. This was a bootstrap paradox, you realized. The professor learned the name from you, but you'd learned it from Arven, who'd learned it from the professor. The name had no true origin point, existed in a loop that sustained itself. The professor noticed Briar's book, the one you carried detailing the expedition to find Terapagos. They asked to see it, and as they read, their excitement grew. This was the breakthrough they'd been searching for. Information about Terapagos, about its location in the underdepths, about its connection to the Terastal phenomenon, and by extension to the possibility of reaching across timelines. The professor asked if they could trade their copy of Heath's book, the Scarlet or Violet book, for Briar's account. You agreed. The exchange was made. And then the professor said something that would haunt you. They mused about how space and time worked, about how this encounter might not be happening in the same timeline, about how reality might be more complex than simple linear progression from past to future. They theorized that Pokemon from different timelines could be pulled into this one, that the Paradox Pokémon might not come from the literal past or future of this world, but from alternate versions of it, parallel realities where evolution took different paths, where technology developed in different directions. The mist began to thicken again. The professor knew their time was ending. They said their goodbye, thanking you for this impossible meeting, for the information that would allow them to complete their life's work. Then they vanished, pulled back to whenever they'd come from, carrying Briar's book with them, armed with the knowledge that would eventually lead to the creation of the time machine and everything that followed. You would find evidence of this encounter later if you descended into the Area Zero underdepth again and explored thoroughly. In a hidden chamber, on a desk surrounded by research equipment, there was a journal entry in the professor's handwriting. It described an impossible meeting at a crystal pool in the eastern lands, where a mysterious child had given them a white book containing crucial information about Terapagos. The entry existed here, in the depths, written by the professor before their death. The timeline was stable, the loop complete. Your action in the future had caused an effect in the past, which led to consequences that made your future action possible. Causality had folded in on itself, creating a paradox that simply existed without beginning or end. But what did this mean for the Paradox Pokémon themselves? If the professor theorized they came from alternate timelines rather than this world's past or future, then the entire framing changed. These weren't ancient creatures from millions of years ago or futuristic robots from centuries ahead. They were versions of Pokémon from worlds that developed differently, where Jigglypuff never evolved past its primal Screamtail form, where Delibird developed into the sophisticated Iron Bundle, where all the variations that never happened in this timeline happened in others. This would explain the central paradox. Heath encountered Paradox Pokémon 200 years ago because Terapagos, hibernating in the underdepths, had the power to create temporary rifts between timelines. Its dormant energy occasionally pulled creatures from other realities into Area Zero, just as it would later pull the professor through time and space to the crystal pool. Heath's encounter with the stellar form Terapagos might have been a vision, a projection across time, or it might have been a genuine meeting facilitated by Terapagos' power. Heath's consciousness might have been pulled forward to witness the discovery of his namesake Pokémon, or Terapagos might have projected its awareness backward to touch the mind of the first human to document its existence. The sketch artist on Heath's expedition had imagined fusion Pokémon, combinations of legendary species that didn't exist, except later those exact combinations were discovered. Walking Wake resembling a prehistoric Suicune, Gouging Fire resembling an ancient Entei, Raging Bolt resembling a primal Raikou, Iron Leaves resembling a futuristic Virizion, Iron Boulder resembling an advanced Terrakion, Iron Crown resembling a mechanized Cobalion. How had imagination become reality? Perhaps through the same mechanism, perhaps the sketch artist, exposed to the energies of Area Zero, to the proximity of dormant Terapagos, had their imagination transmitted across timelines, manifesting in alternate realities where those fusion forms actually developed. Or perhaps they'd received visions of those alternate timelines, their sketches not creative invention, but documentation of genuine sights received through dimensional awareness they didn't understand. The professor's time machine, then, wasn't truly a time machine at all. It was a dimensional anchor, a device that used Terapagos' power to establish stable connections to alternate timelines and pull Pokémon from those realities into this one. The machine didn't need to account for paradoxes because it wasn't actually manipulating time. It was reaching sideways across the multiverse, finding versions of Paldea where Pokémon had evolved along radically different paths and extracting specimens from those worlds. This explained why the Paradox Pokémon seemed inconsistent with known evolutionary history. Walking Wake couldn't be a prehistoric Suicune because Suicune didn't exist until 150 years ago, created when an unnamed Pokémon died in the burning of the Brass Tower and was resurrected by Ho-Oh. There was no timeline in this world's past where Walking Wake could have evolved into Suicune. But in another timeline, one where the Brass Tower incident never happened or happened differently, where the legendary beast followed a different evolutionary path. Walking Away could exist as a separate, parallel species that resembled what Suicune might have been under different circumstances. The future Paradox Pokémon face similar impossibilities. The technological aesthetic of Iron Bundle, Iron Jugulus, Iron Moth, and the others reflected a specific vision of the future, one that incorporated recognizable design elements from current Paldean technology. But technology develops unpredictably. The futuristic designs in these Pokémon were futuristic from the perspective of someone in the present, imagining tomorrow, not the actual aesthetic that would develop centuries from now. Unless they came from alternate timelines where technology did develop along those exact predicted lines, where the imagined future became actual reality in a parallel Paldea. Even Koraidon and Miraidon made more sense through this lens. They weren't actually prehistoric or futuristic Cyclizar. They were alternate timeline versions of Cyclizar, species that had developed in worlds where different evolutionary pressures produced these dramatically different results. The professor, reading Heath's book, had imagined what ancient or future forms of Cyclizar might look like, and their machine, powered by Terapagos' reality warping energy, had found timelines where those imagined forms actually existed and pulled them through. The implications were staggering. If Terapagos could connect to alternate timelines, if Area Zero's energy facilitated these connections, then the entire crater became a nexus point, a place where reality was thinner, where the boundaries between parallel worlds grew permeable. The ancient symbols carved into the deepest caverns, the mysterious steel plate with its map of Paldea, these might have been left by visitors from other timelines, by explorers who'd found their way to this nexus from their own versions of reality. The Great Crater itself, formed 1 million years ago by unknown means, might have been created by some catastrophic breach between dimensions, a collision, point where multiple timelines touched and left a permanent scar. The Herba Mystica suddenly took on new significance. These herbs, found only in Area Zero, had properties unlike any other plant life. They could heal injuries instantly, could cause Pokémon to grow to tremendous size, could restore abilities that had been lost. What if they too were products of dimensional intersection? Plants that incorporated biological traits from multiple timelines simultaneously, their impossible properties resulting from their nature as amalgamations of different realities' flora. And Terapagos itself, the source of all this strangeness. What was it truly? A Pokémon that could crystallize energy, that could transform between forms, that possessed the power of every type simultaneously in its stellar form, that could project consciousness across time and space, that could pull beings from other timelines and send them back. It had existed for at least 2 million years, surviving in a state of crystalline hibernation, while its unconscious power reshaped Area Zero around it. Was it even native to this timeline? Or had it too come from somewhere else, a dimensional refugee that arrived in Paldea's prehistoric past and fell into dormancy, its presence creating the conditions that would eventually draw more cross-timeline visitors to this location? The professor had died pursuing their dream, killed by one of the very creatures their research brought into this world. The AI, created to continue that work, had sacrificed itself to stop what the professor had started, recognizing that the dream had become a nightmare, that flooding Paldea with creatures from alternate timelines would cause ecological catastrophe. Arven had lost his parent to obsession, had grown up alone because the professor valued their research more than their own child. Kieran had nearly destroyed himself chasing power, seeking validation through legendary Pokémon rather than accepting his own worth. Area Zero had touched all of these people, had drawn them down into its crystalline depths, and none of them had emerged unchanged. The place itself seemed to feed on obsession, to encourage the kind of single-minded pursuit that destroyed everything else in service of one goal. Heath had been discredited for telling the truth. The professor had been consumed by the work. Even Briar, sweet and enthusiastic as she was, showed signs of that same obsessive focus, desperate to prove her ancestors' accounts, willing to risk lives entering the underdepths. You'd descended into those depths yourself now. You'd seen the glowing caverns, battled the Paradox Pokémon, faced the AI and its Paradise Protection Protocol, witnessed the death of one dream and the birth of understanding. You'd found Terapagos, caught it, carried with you the source of the Terastal phenomenon, the key to understanding everything that made Area Zero what it was. You'd met the professor before their fall, seen them in their youth before obsession calcified into the only thing they could feel. You'd walk through bootstrap paradoxes and dimensional intersections and scientific hubris rendered in crystal and chrome. And still, mysteries remained. The steel plate with its impossible map, the carved symbols of unknown origin, the question of whether Terapagos was truly the only one of its kind, or if others existed in other timelines. Other nexus points where realities touched. The question of what would happen if more breaches occurred, if other researchers inspired by Heath's restored reputation, or the professor's work attempted to recreate the dimensional anchor machine. The question of whether the Paradox Pokémon, now permanent residents of Area Zero, would eventually adapt to this timeline or forever remain outsiders whose presence destabilized the local ecosystem. The great crater stood at Paldea's heart, beautiful and terrible, its clouds hiding wonders and nightmares in equal measure. The Pokémon League maintained restrictions on entry, but you'd proven those restrictions couldn't contain human curiosity, couldn't stop people from seeking answers to questions that perhaps shouldn't be asked. Every researcher who descended into Area Zero changed it slightly, left their mark, added their own layer to the accumulating strata of mystery. You could return whenever you wanted now. Your Koraidon or Miraidon could fly you there, could dive through the clouds into that luminous world below. Paradox Pokémon roam those caverns, available for capture if you had the skill and the Pokeballs. Terapagos rested in your party, its infinite energy charging your Terra Orb, granting you access to power that few trainers would ever wield. The research stations stood empty, their journals still readable, their beds still available for rest, silent monuments to the professor's work and the AI's sacrifice. But every time you descended, you carried with you the knowledge of what Area Zero took from those who stayed too long, who let themselves be consumed by its mysteries. Heath had lost his reputation. The professor had lost their family, their life, their humanity. The AI had lost its existence. Arven had lost his childhood. Kieran had nearly lost himself. Area Zero demanded prices from everyone who entered. The question was whether the knowledge gained, the truths revealed, the understanding earned justified what was paid. The professor thought so, even knowing their fate. Briar thought so, pursuing vindication for her ancestor despite the risks. You'd made that choice yourself when you descended the first time, when you agreed to face the AI, when you dove into the underdepths seeking Terapagos. The forbidden truth of the Paradox Pokémon wasn't just about where they came from or how they arrived. It was about what their existence meant, what Area Zero represented, what Terapagos' power revealed about the nature of reality itself. They were proof that this world, this timeline, was one among infinite possibilities, that every choice made created branches, alternate paths where different decisions led to different outcomes, that somewhere out there, across dimensional barriers, were Paldeas, where Heath was believed from the start, where the professor chose family over research, where Arven grew up loved, where Paradox Pokémon were the dominant species and humans were the outsiders. The question of what you'd found in those depths wasn't just academic. Every Paradox Pokémon represented a window into another version of reality, a glimpse of evolutionary paths not taken in this world. Take Great Tusk, the creature that had attacked Heath's expedition 200 years ago, killing one of his team members. Donphan in this timeline evolved as a relatively gentle ground type, powerful but approachable, adapted to coexistence with humans. Great Tusk showed what happened when that relationship never formed. Ground and fighting type, massively muscular, tusks glowing with ancient energy. It was pure survival instinct rendered in prehistoric fury. This was the apex predator version of a species that in our world had become domesticated, and it proved the paradox at the heart of their existence. Heath had encountered this creature before the professor's machine existed, before the professor was even born. Sandy Shocks illustrated an even stranger impossibility. Magneton was an artificial creation in this timeline, 3 Magnemite fusing together, relatively recent arrivals in Pokemon history. Yet here was Sandy Shocks, supposedly an ancient form combining electric and ground types, suggesting evolution in desert environments, with magnetic minerals and electrical storms. How could an ancient form of a modern artificial Pokemon exist? Only if timelines diverged at their very foundations. In Sandy Shocks' home reality, the evolutionary path that led to Magnemite occurred naturally, millions of years earlier. Different geological histories, different rules, same recognizable species. The legendary Paradox Pokémon made the contradictions undeniable. Walking Wake resembled an ancient Suicune, except Suicune had a known origin point in this timeline's history. 150 years ago, when Ho-Oh resurrected 3 unnamed Pokemon that died in the Brass Tower fire. There's no timeline in this world's past where Walking Wake could have existed and evolved into Suicune. The alternate timeline explanation became mandatory. Walking Wake came from a reality where the Brass Tower incident never happened, where these species evolved naturally over millions of years rather than being created by divine intervention. Each Paradox Pokémon told the same story in different ways. Timelines where familiar Pokémon followed radically different evolutionary paths, where the gentle became aggressive, where the organic became mechanical, where divine intervention was replaced by natural selection or technological advancement. The future forms, Iron Treads, Iron Bundle, Iron Valiant, all the mechanical versions that replaced extinct organic species or merged multiple evolutionary paths. They represented timelines where humanity's relationship with Pokemon had transformed into something colder, more efficient, more focused on utility than partnership. Whether those were dystopias or simply different values, different priorities, remained a matter of perspective. The legendary Paradox Pokémon added another layer to the mystery. Walking Wake, Gouging Fire, and Raging Bolt in Scarlet's timeline represented ancient forms of Suicune, Entei, and Raikou respectively. except those legendary beasts had known origin points in this timeline's history. They were created 150 years ago when Ho-Oh resurrected 3 unnamed Pokemon that died in the Brass Tower fire in Johto. There was no timeline in this world's past where these ancient forms could have existed and then evolved into the current legendary beasts. The alternate timeline explanation became mandatory here. Walking Wake, Gouging Fire, and Raging Bolt came from realities where the Brass Tower incident never happened or happened differently, where these species evolved naturally over millions of years, rather than being created by divine intervention. Walking Wake combined water and dragon types, suggesting the unnamed Pokemon that became Suicune in this timeline might have had draconic heritage in other realities. Its form was more aggressive than Suicune's elegant grace, built for hunting rather than the purification role Suicune served. Gouging Fire was fire and dragon type, taking Entei's volcanic fury and adding predatory cunning. Raging Bolt combined electric and dragon types. Raiku's lightning transformed into something more primal, more dangerous. All 3 existed despite the logical impossibility of their existence in this timeline's history, proof positive that they originated somewhere else. Some Johto that developed along completely different paths. Iron Leaves, Iron Boulder, and Iron Crown in Violet's timeline presented the same paradox in mechanical form. They resembled futuristic versions of Virizion, Terrakion, and Cobalion respectively, the Swords of Justice from Unova. But these noble Pokemon were still alive and active in the present day, not extinct species that needed mechanical replacement. So why did robot versions exist? Perhaps in Ironleaf's timeline, the Swords of Justice fell in battle defending Unova from some great threat, and humans built these mechanical successors to carry on their legacy. Perhaps they represented an attempt to improve upon nature, to create perfectly consistent heroes who never tired, never faltered, never made mistakes born of emotion or fatigue. Iron Leaves was grass and psychic type, incorporating both Virizion's grace and enhanced processing power that let it predict enemy movements before they occurred. Iron Boulder, as rock and psychic, combined Terrakion's crushing strength with tactical analysis capabilities. Iron Crown, as steel and psychic, merged Cobalion's leadership with perfect strategic computation. All 6 of these legendary Paradox Pokémon resembled the sketches Heath's expedition artist had made 200 years ago, the imagined fusion forms drawn from inspiration, or hallucination, or dimensional vision. The fact that they matched those sketches exactly suggested that the artist hadn't been imagining at all, but receiving genuine impressions from alternate timelines, from realities where these exact combinations existed. Terapagos' influence, even while dormant, extended further than anyone had initially understood. It didn't just power the Terastal phenomenon, it actively connected Area Zero to the broader multiverse, creating a nexus where information and occasionally matter could bleed through from other realities. The 4 additional Paradox Pokémon introduced in the Indigo Disc DLC expanded the implications further. In Scarlet, Gouging Fire and Raging Bolt appeared alongside Walking Wake, completing the set of ancient legendary beasts. In Violet, Iron Crown and Iron Boulder appeared alongside Iron Leaves, completing the mechanical Swords of Justice. Their discovery in Area Zero, after the time machine had been shut down, proved that Paradox Pokémon could still appear in the crater, even without the professor's machine actively pulling them through. Terapagos' presence alone was sufficient to occasionally create dimensional rifts, though these natural occurrences were far less frequent than the machine's forced extractions had been. The ecology of Area Zero itself warranted deeper consideration. The crater had developed into a unique biome, unlike anywhere else in Paldea, or possibly anywhere else in the world. The concentration of Terastal energy affected everything that lived there. Normal Pokemon species found in the crater often displayed unusual behaviors, growing larger than their counterparts on the surface, becoming more aggressive, sometimes developing coloration or patterns not seen in standard populations. The white flower floette that appeared exclusively in Area Zero carried symbolism trainers recognized. White flowers traditionally representing death and mourning in many cultures. Whether Floette appeared as a response to the professor's death or had always been present was unclear, but their exclusive presence in the crater suggested they found something there, some quality of the environment that nowhere else could provide. Every moth-based Pokemon species in Paldea could be found in Area Zero. Venomoth, Masquerain, Volcarona, Frostmoth, and their Paradox counterparts, Slitherwing and Iron Moth. The concentration of moths pointed to the crater's extreme brightness, its caverns filled with glowing crystals that attracted light-seeking species from across the region. But moths also symbolized death in many traditions, drawn to flames that would destroy them, beautiful and doomed. Their presence in Area Zero carried the symbolism, a reminder that this place was beautiful and deadly, that it attracted those seeking illumination, but often consumed them in the pursuit. Glimmora and its pre-evolution. Glimmet populated Area Zero in vast numbers, their crystalline bodies perfectly adapted to the environment. These Pokemon fed on Terastal energy, absorbing it from the massive Terra crystals that grew throughout the crater, stabbing their crystalline structures into walls and extracting nourishment directly from the energy flowing through the rock. Carbink also appeared in Area Zero, another species whose body incorporated crystalline structures, though whether Carbink naturally evolved to match the environment or had been created by Terapagos' energy remained uncertain. Some researchers theorized that Glimmet, Glimmora, and Carbink were all born from Terra crystals, that they represented Terapagos' energy achieving a form of quasi-life, existing somewhere between inorganic crystal and organic creature. The massive Terra crystals themselves grew throughout Area Zero, especially in the deeper caverns and most extensively in the underdepths. These weren't just large versions of the crystals that appeared elsewhere in Paldea. They were fundamentally different, constantly generating energy rather than simply storing it, growing perpetually rather than remaining static. The largest ones resembled trees, their branches spreading across cavern ceilings, their roots digging deep into the bedrock. At the very bottom of the underdepths, that crystallized tree where you'd found Terapagos was unlike any other structure in the world, completely encased in crystal, yet somehow still alive, still growing, a fusion of organic and inorganic that shouldn't be possible but existed anyway. These crystal trees raise questions about what Area Zero had been like before Terapagos entered hibernation, before its power transformed the environment. Had there been normal trees once, normal forests that gradually crystallized over millions of years? Or had the crystals always grown here, their presence attracting Terapagos in the first place, drawing it to a location where it could safely hibernate while its power fed on and was fed by the existing crystalline formations? The erosion and cave-ins that shaped the underdepths had buried evidence of what came before, leaving only the present configuration as observable data. The research stations scattered throughout Area Zero served as time capsules, documenting the professor's descent into obsession through journal entries left at each location. Reading them in sequence painted a picture of someone brilliant gradually losing perspective, becoming so focused on their goal that everything else faded to background noise. The early entries showed excitement, wonder at the discoveries being made, genuine scientific curiosity about the Terastal phenomenon and its potential applications. The later entries grew colder, more focused, mentions of family becoming less frequent until they disappeared entirely. The AI the professor created couldn't understand why someone would make those choices, couldn't grasp the psychological mechanisms that let obsession override love and responsibility. But reading those journals, you could trace the path, see how each small decision to prioritize research over relationships compounded into the tragedy that eventually consumed them. Station Number 1's journals focused on initial observations of the Terastal phenomenon, the professor's excitement at discovering the connection between the crystalline energy and Pokémon transformation. Station Number 2 documented encounters with Paradox Pokémon, the first specimens pulled through the time machine, the professor's joy at achieving what Heath had only been able to observe. Station Number 3 revealed information about Koraidon and Miraidon, the professor's affection for the first specimen, their plans for creating a paradise where these magnificent creatures could thrive. Station Number 4 showed damage, hastily written final entries, evidence of the catastrophic fight that had killed the professor and forced the AI to take control. The Zero Lab itself was a monument to scientific achievement and human failure. The time machine dominated the space, its hexagonal plates arranged in patterns that mimicked Terapagos' shell, suggesting the professor had understood at least intuitively that they needed to replicate the source of Terastal energy structure to create stable dimensional connections. The laboratory's other equipment documented years of research, failed experiments, gradual progress toward the breakthrough that would cost everything. Computer terminals contained research notes, some encrypted, some openly accessible, detailing theories about timeline manipulation, dimensional physics, the nature of Terastal energy itself. One particularly revealing set of notes discussed the White Book, the volume given to the professor during their mysterious encounter in an unfamiliar place. The professor had analyzed it extensively, trying to understand where it came from, how it contained information they hadn't discovered yet, but desperately needed. They'd theorized about bootstrap paradoxes, about causality loops, about the possibility that future events could influence past outcomes through dimensional connections. They'd almost grasped the truth, almost realized that meeting at the crystal pool with you and Terapagos would happen in their future and your past, that the information exchange would create a stable loop where neither the machine nor the meeting could exist without the other. But they'd dismissed it as too improbable, too much like fantasy, never quite accepting that reality was stranger than any theory they could construct. The Paradise Protection Protocol that the AI had been forced to execute represented the professor's greatest success and most terrible failure. They'd succeeded in creating a program sophisticated enough to defend their research against any threat, sophisticated enough that even an AI based on their own consciousness couldn't override it. They'd failed to account for the possibility that defending their research might require harming people, might require perpetuating something that should have been stopped. The protocol had no ethics, no judgment beyond its single directive: protect the time machine and ensure the research continues. When you'd face the AI in battle, you'd essentially been fighting the professor's will stripped of everything human, reduced to pure obsession rendered in code and defense routines. The time machine's deactivation hadn't destroyed it. The structure remained intact in the Zero Lab, silent now, its crystalline core no longer glowing, but potentially reactivable if someone had the knowledge and the desire. The AI had taken the key that powered it, but the machine itself was just hardware, just carefully arranged hexagonal plates incorporating Terastal energy converters and dimensional anchoring systems. A sufficiently skilled researcher could potentially build a new AI, could recreate the power source, could restart the whole process. The League had sealed Area Zero more thoroughly after your expedition, adding additional security protocols. But how long would those hold against determined scientists who wanted to continue the professor's work? Breyer's book, The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero, documented everything she'd witnessed during the expedition to the underdepths. She'd written it with academic rigor, but also genuine wonder, capturing both the scientific significance and the emotional weight of discovering Terapagos, of proving Heath had been telling the truth all along. The book became required reading at Pokémon academies across multiple regions. Vindication for Heath 2 centuries after his death, and restoration of the reputation his family had fought to preserve. But the book also inspired new researchers to seek access to Area Zero, to conduct their own experiments with Terastal energy, to perhaps attempt variations on the professor's dimensional anchor machine. Knowledge once released couldn't be contained. The truth about Terapagos and the Paradox Pokémon was out in the world now, and people would respond to it in ways both beneficial and dangerous. The stellar Terra type that you'd encountered in the underdepths represented Terapagos' most fundamental power. Standard terastallization allowed Pokémon to change to one of the 18 known types, their bodies covered in crystalline structures reflecting their new type. But stellar terastallization combined all 18 types simultaneously, creating something that transcended normal type interactions. A Pokémon in stellar form gained advantages against everything while having fewer weaknesses than any single type would possess. The hexagonal patterns that appeared on stellar terastallized Pokémon matched Terapagos' shell exactly, down to the smallest detail, proof that this power came directly from the source of all Terastal energy, rather than being a derivative phenomenon. Terapagos itself could access all three of its forms depending on circumstances. Its normal form was small, vulnerable, designed for survival through mimicry and hiding. When threatened or when it needed to move, it could crystallize energy from its environment to form a protective shell, entering its terrestrial form, where its defensive capabilities increased dramatically. And when it truly needed power, when circumstances demanded its full strength, it could terastallize into stellar form, becoming that massive crystalline entity you'd battled in the underdepths, its power amplified to world-changing levels. The fact that Terapagos allowed itself to be caught by you suggested intelligence and intention rather than mere defeat. It could have fled into deeper caverns, could have maintained its stellar form indefinitely, could have made itself impossible to contain. Instead, it chose partnership, recognizing perhaps that working with you offered better outcomes than continued isolation in the underdepths. Or maybe it was tired, after 2 million years of hibernation and sudden violent awakening, and wanted connection with something alive and aware. Terapagos' consciousness remained largely mysterious. It showed personality, displayed preferences, clearly understood language even if it couldn't speak, but its thoughts, its motivations, its experience of reality remained inaccessible to human comprehension. Your permanent Terra Orb charge represented a practical benefit of carrying Terapagos, but it also meant you were walking around with the source of the Terastal phenomenon in your pocket, with a creature whose power could theoretically open dimensional rifts anywhere you traveled. The responsibility was staggering. If Terapagos decided to establish another nexus point somewhere outside Paldea, if its energy started leaking into environments not adapted to handle it, the ecological consequences could be catastrophic. But so far, it seemed content to remain with you, to use its power only when you requested terastallization for battles, to exist as a companion rather than as the reality-warping entity it could become if it chose. The mystery of the carved symbols in Area Zero's deepest caverns remained unsolved, even after everything else had been revealed. Heath had pondered whether they were left by explorers from the Paldean Empire era, by expeditions that reached the depths before his own, but the symbols themselves suggested greater antiquity. The style didn't match known Paldean art from any historical period. The arrangements incorporated geometric patterns that seemed to reference crystalline structures, hexagonal repetitions that might represent Terapagos, or simply reflect the natural formations around them. Some symbols resembled writing, but no linguist had successfully translated them. Others looked like maps or diagrams, though what they mapped remained unclear. The steel plate was even more mysterious. Its material resisted all attempts at analysis, harder than any known metal, unscratched by tools that should have marked it easily. The symbols engraved on it resembled Paldea's modern geography with unsettling accuracy, showing the outline of the region, the placement of major geographical features, even hints of where cities would eventually be built. How could someone have created a map of future Paldea? The alternate timeline explanation suggested possibilities. Perhaps someone from another dimension where Paldea developed differently had left the plate as a marker or warning. Perhaps it came from a future timeline where Paldea's geography had stabilized, brought back through time by a dimensional traveler who'd found their way to Area Zero. Perhaps it was created by something non-human, by Pokémon, or entities whose understanding of space and time differed fundamentally from human perception. The most disturbing theory suggested the plate was a coordinate marker, that it designated Area Zero as a nexus point for dimensional travelers from across the multiverse, a place where beings from other realities could safely interact without destabilizing either timeline. If true, that meant Area Zero had served as a meeting place for eons, that the crater's unique properties had attracted visitors from countless alternate Paldeas, each one leaving traces that accumulated over geological time scales. The symbols might not be a single language, but fragments of many, messages left by travelers who passed through and wanted to document their presence for others who would come after. The hourglass shape that appeared in some of the symbols carried obvious temporal implications. Hourglasses measured time, tracked its passage, reminded viewers that existence was finite and fleeting. But hourglasses could also be flipped, their flow reversed, sand falling upward if you inverted them. Was this a hint that Area Zero allowed time to flow in non-standard directions? that causality itself could be inverted within the crater's unique dimensional geometry. The bootstrap paradoxes you'd experienced, the loops where effects preceded causes and outcomes generated their own prerequisites, suggested Area Zero operated according to different rules than normal reality. The hourglass symbols might be warnings or explanations, attempts by previous visitors to document the temporal anomalies they had encountered. The formation of the Great Crater itself, 1 million years ago by unknown means, presented another unsolved mystery. What could create a circular crater that massive without obvious impact signatures, without the geological evidence that would accompany meteor strikes or volcanic eruptions? Dimensional intersection offered one possibility. If two realities collided at a single point, if the boundaries between timelines temporarily breached, the energy release might create exactly this kind of circular disruption without traditional impact mechanics. The crater's formation coincided with the period when Terapagos was already in hibernation, so it couldn't have been directly caused by Terapagos' power, but perhaps other dimensional travelers, other beings exploring the nexus point, had caused the breach. Or perhaps Terapagos' hibernation itself destabilized the dimensional barriers, its unconscious power radiating outward until it punched through into other realities and the resulting backlash scarred the land. The clouds that perpetually covered the Great Crater weren't normal weather patterns. They formed regardless of broader meteorological conditions, remaining constant even when clear skies dominated the rest of Paldea. Some researchers theorized the clouds resulted from the temperature differential between Area Zero's depths and the surface, but that didn't explain their perfect circularity, their refusal to dissipate even in strong winds. Alternative theories suggested the clouds were another manifestation of dimensional anomalies, that they represented the visible boundary where normal space transitioned into the unstable reality of Area Zero proper. Flying through those clouds felt different than normal atmospheric entry, a sense of crossing a threshold rather than merely descending through weather. Pokémon avoided the clouds instinctively, refusing to fly directly through them even when their trainers attempted to command it, trusting their senses more than human judgment about what was safe. The Paldean Empire's obsession with Area Zero, their willingness to bankrupt themselves sending expedition after expedition into the crater, made more sense when considering what they might have actually been seeking. The rumors spoke of treasure, but what kind? Perhaps early explorers had encountered dimensional anomalies, seen glimpses of alternate timelines where Paldea possessed wealth or technology this version lacked. Perhaps they'd found artifacts left by previous dimensional travelers, objects whose properties or composition suggested unimaginable value. The Empire's decline after 1,000 years of failed expeditions demonstrated both persistence and inability to learn from failure, a collective obsession that mirrored the professor's individual fixation. Something about Area Zero inspired that kind of monomania, that single-minded pursuit that destroyed everything else. Whether that was a property of the location itself, some subtle influence from Terapagos' dormant power, or merely human nature responding to the unknown, remained debatable. The transformation of the Paldean Empire into modern Paldea, its alliance with neighboring countries, its eventual dissolution of imperial power, might have been the healthiest thing that could have happened. The new governmental structure didn't eliminate interest in Area Zero, but distributed it, prevented any single ruler from committing the entire nation's resources to crater exploration. The Pokemon League's administration of Area Zero in the present day, their strict control over access, the requirement that anyone entering must receive explicit permission and demonstrate competence, all represented lessons learned from the Empire's mistakes. Area Zero would always attract researchers, explorers, and treasure seekers, but controlling that access prevented the kind of systemic collapse that had doomed the Empire. Naranja and Uva academies, established 805 years before the present, represented the Empire's late attempt to approach Area Zero through systematic education rather than brute force exploration. By training Pokemon scholars, by building institutional knowledge over generations, they hope to eventually produce researchers capable of safely studying the crater. The Academy succeeded in that goal, producing brilliant scientists, including eventually the Professor, though that success came with its own costs. The Professor's training gave them the tools to achieve what no one else had managed, but no educational program could have prepared them for the psychological toll of success, for the addictive quality of achieving the impossible and wanting more. Director Clavel's explicit prohibition against students entering Area Zero during their treasure hunt showed the Academy administration understood the danger, but rules couldn't contain human curiosity indefinitely. You'd broken that rule along with Arven, Nimona, and Penny. You'd descended into the forbidden zone, faced its challenges, emerged changed but alive. The question was whether your example would inspire other students to attempt the same. Whether Area Zero would claim more victims among young trainers who thought themselves invincible, who believed the dangers didn't apply to them because they'd trained hard and built strong teams. The Path of Legends storyline that led you to Area Zero had been about healing, about restoring what was broken. Arven's Mabosstief needed the Herba Mystica to recover from injuries. Your Koraidon or Miraidon needed them to regain its lost abilities. Both succeeded, both healed, but the cost of obtaining those herbs, the battles against Titan Pokemon scattered across Paldea, foreshadowed the greater challenges waiting below. Each Herba Mystica restored one ability, one capacity that had been lost, until finally the patient was whole again. But healing often required pain first, required facing things you'd rather avoid, required descending into dark places to find what you needed to return to the light. Arven's story particularly resonated with themes of abandonment and recovery. He'd grown up without his parent, raised himself in that lonely lighthouse, learned to cook and care for his Pokemon because no one else would do it for him. His partner Mabosstief had been his one constant companion, the only living thing that never left him. When Mabosstief was injured, possibly by the aggressive Koraidon or Miraidon escaping from Area Zero, Arven finally had motivation to pursue his absent parents' work, to seek out the Herba Mystica mentioned in Heath's book. The journey across Paldea defeating Titans was Arven's coming of age, his transformation from abandoned child into capable young man who could solve his own problems. Meeting the AI in the Zero Lab, learning his parent had been dead for years, confronting the truth that he'd never received the acknowledgement or apology he deserved. These were the final wounds that needed healing, and he found that healing not through his parent but through friends, through you and Nimona and Penny, through people who showed up when it mattered and stood beside him when reality proved worse than his worst fears. Nimona's presence throughout the journey represented something different but equally important. She was the strongest trainer in her year, possibly one of the strongest in Paldea, but strength alone left her isolated. No one could match her in battle, so no one wanted to battle her seriously. She was alone at the top, looking down, seeing others fall behind and unable to find equals. You represented possibility to her. Someone who might eventually stand on her level, who fought with genuine passion rather than obligation or fear. She followed you into Area Zero, not because she understood the stakes, but because you were going there. Because wherever you went, worthwhile challenges existed. Her battle against the Glimora, protecting Research Station Number 1, was practice, entertainment, a warm-up for whatever came next. She didn't grasp the tragedy unfolding around Arven, couldn't quite process the emotional weight of the professor's death and the AI's sacrifice. But she stood there anyway, loyal even when she didn't fully understand what loyalty meant in that context. Penny's role was quieter, but no less significant. She'd founded Team Star as Operation Starfall, organizing bullied students into a support network that eventually spiraled beyond her control, into something resembling a gang. She'd hidden behind her online persona, avoiding face-to-face interaction, building walls to protect herself from rejection. Your friendship gradually broke down those walls, encouraged her to step into the real world, to trust that people might accept her as she actually was, rather than as the persona she projected. Following you into Area Zero required courage from Penny because the crater held no computers to hide behind, no screens to mediate interaction. She faced Screamtail or Iron Bundle at Research Station Number 2, confronted a Paradox Pokémon with nothing but her own skill, and proved to herself that she was capable beyond the digital realm. The three of them, Arven, Nimona, and Penny, represented different responses to isolation and different paths toward connection. Arven isolated by abandonment, Nimona isolated by excellence, Penny isolated by choice, all finding in your friendship something they had been missing. Area Zero tested those bonds, forced them to work together despite their different motivations, demonstrated that friendship meant showing up even when you didn't understand, even when the situation seemed hopeless. They couldn't fight the AI when the Paradise Protection Protocol activated and locked everyone's Pokeballs. They could only watch as you and your Koraidon or Miraidon faced impossible odds. But they were there, their presence alone providing support, bearing witness to your struggle, refusing to abandon you even when they could contribute nothing practical. That loyalty mattered more than any battle assist could have. The fact that you could return to Area Zero after completing the main story, after shutting down the time machine and seeing the credits roll, transformed the crater from story location into post-game content. You could explore at your leisure now, could fly your Koraidon or Miraidon through those glowing caverns, could seek out and catch Paradox Pokémon for your collection. The aggressive Koraidon or Miraidon that had killed the professor, that had nearly killed your companion twice, was down there waiting, available for capture if you had the skill and determination. Catching it felt like claiming victory over tragedy, like proving that even the most dangerous creatures could be brought into partnership rather than remaining permanent enemies. The former Titans, scattered across Paldea, offered similar opportunities. After defeating them during the Path of Legends, they remained at their locations as normal-sized Pokémon, the largest possible size for their species, but no longer gigantic. You could catch them, train them, build teams around them. They retained the Titan mark, a designation that identified them as these specific individuals rather than random members of their species. The Quaking Earth Titan, Great Tusk or Iron Treads, depending on your version, was particularly significant because catching it meant owning one of the Paradox Pokémon that had terrorized Heath's expedition, that had killed a member of his team 200 years ago. The line between history and present collapsed when you held that Pokeball, when the creature that existed as legend became yours to command. The research stations could be used as fast travel points, their teleportation panels allowing instant transport between them or back to the Zero Gate. This convenience transformed navigation through Area Zero from treacherous descent to efficient exploration. You could visit Station 1 to review the professor's early journals, jump to Station 4 to see where everything fell apart, return to the Zero Lab to stand in front of the silent time machine and contemplate everything it represented. The beds in each station allowed rest and healing, turning these way stations into safe havens within a dangerous environment. The professor had built them well, intended them to support long-term research, never imagining they'd eventually serve as monuments to their failure. The biodiversity of Area Zero deserved more study than it had received. The concentration of rare species, the presence of Paradox Pokémon alongside modern ones, the unique variants of common species that appeared only in the crater, all suggested complex ecological interactions that researchers had barely begun to map. How did Paradox Pokémon affect the food chain? What did they eat, and what tried to eat them? Did they compete with native species for resources, or had they found unique niches that didn't overlap with existing ecosystem roles? The fact that Volcarona could coexist with Slitherwing suggested either different dietary requirements or different hunting patterns that prevented direct competition, but detailed observational studies would be needed to confirm those hypotheses. The Titan Pokemon's creation through Herba Mystica consumption raised questions about what made those herbs so powerful. Were they synthesizing terrestrial energy into biological compounds? Were they products of dimensional intersection, incorporating nutrients from multiple timelines simultaneously? Why did they cause growth specifically rather than other forms of enhancement? The professor had studied them but focused more on terastallization than on the herbs themselves, leaving gaps in understanding that future researchers would need to fill. Arven had prepared them in sandwiches, combined them with other ingredients, used them successfully to heal Malbustif and restore Koraidon or Miraidon's abilities, but he worked from intuition and inherited recipe knowledge rather than scientific understanding of the mechanisms involved. The fact that Herba Mystica appeared in Terra Raid battles across Paldea after the main story suggested they weren't exclusive to Area Zero anymore, that they'd somehow spread beyond the crater, despite the expedition team's cultivation project failing 200 years ago. Perhaps some seeds had survived, had established hidden populations that took centuries to spread, but finally achieved sufficient distribution to appear in raids. Perhaps the terastallization phenomenon itself could generate them spontaneously in locations with sufficient terastal energy concentration. Perhaps dimensional rifts occasionally brought them through from alternate Paldeas, where Herba Mystica grew commonly rather than as rare treasures. The philosophical implications of the multiverse revelation extended far beyond Area Zero specifically. If every choice created branches, if alternate timelines existed for every possible outcome, then every trainer's journey existed in infinite variations across infinite realities. Somewhere, there were timelines where you'd chosen a different starter Pokemon, where you'd lost key battles, where you'd never descended into Area Zero at all. Somewhere the professor succeeded in creating their paradise and lived to see it. Somewhere, Heath's expedition was believed from the start and Area Zero was explored systematically over centuries. Somewhere, Terapagos never survived the seismic shifts 2 million years ago, and none of this ever happened. The existence of all these possibilities simultaneously meant that success and failure, tragedy and triumph existed in superposition until observed, until experienced directly in one specific timeline. This raised uncomfortable questions about free will and determinism. If your choices created new timelines, but all possible choices occurred somewhere in the multiverse, did individual agency matter? The alternate timeline theory suggested yes, because each choice created a genuinely new reality, rather than simply selecting from pre-existing possibilities. Your decision to help Arven, to follow the professor's AI into Area Zero, to catch Terapagos, these choices made this specific timeline distinct from all the others, where different decisions led to different outcomes. You couldn't control what happened in alternate timelines, couldn't prevent tragic versions of your story from existing somewhere in the multiverse, but you could shape the reality you inhabited through the choices you made moment by moment. The professor's story illustrated the danger of becoming too focused on alternate possibilities. They'd pursued access to other timelines so obsessively that they'd destroyed their life in this one. They'd sacrificed family, health, morality, eventually their actual life in pursuit of a dream that, even when achieved, brought only momentary satisfaction before demanding more. The time machine worked, they'd succeeded, and then they died without ever experiencing the paradise they'd sacrificed everything to create. The AI inherited that dream, but couldn't understand it, couldn't feel the passion that drove the professor, could only execute the programmed directives and try to minimize harm along the way. The AI's sacrifice in the end, its decision to use the time machine one final time to transport itself to the ancient past or distant future it had been programmed to reach, represented a form of redemption. It couldn't undo the professor's mistakes or restore Arven's childhood or prevent any of the suffering the research had caused, but it could stop the flow of Paradox Pokémon into Paldea, could prevent future ecological catastrophe, could choose the well-being of the world over loyalty to its creator's vision. That choice proved that AI had transcended its programming in some fundamental way, had developed genuine ethical reasoning beyond simple directive execution. It sacrificed its own existence to correct the professor's errors, accepting non-existence as the price of doing what was right rather than what it was built to do. Whether the AI still existed somewhere in whatever timeline it traveled to remained unknown. If it arrived in the ancient past or distant future, if the dimensional anchor functioned as designed, then theoretically it would emerge in that timeline with its consciousness intact. But it would be alone, the only one of its kind, unable to return, unable to share what it learned or experienced. Whether it found purpose in that isolation or simply continued existing without direction, whether it built a new life in that foreign timeline or eventually ceased functioning due to damage or obsolescence, these questions had no answers. The AI disappeared into the light of the time machine and never returned, its fate as mysterious as many other aspects of Area Zero's story. Terapagos offered the theoretical possibility of reaching the AI again if someone really wanted to. Its power over dimensional connections exceeded anything the professor's machine could achieve. If convinced, if properly motivated, Terapagos might be able to locate the specific timeline where the AI arrived and open a temporary rift allowing communication or even retrieval. But attempting that would require convincing Terapagos the effort was worthwhile. would risk destabilizing dimensional barriers in unpredictable ways, might create consequences worse than the AI's loss. Sometimes sacrifices needed to remain sacrifices, their finality giving them meaning that rescue would undermine. The broader Pokemon world's response to the revelation about Paradox Pokémon and alternate timelines would unfold over years or decades as Breyer's book circulated and researchers attempted to replicate or expand upon the professor's work. Some regions might seek to establish their own dimensional research programs, hoping to access alternate timeline variants of their native species. Others might ban such research entirely, recognizing the dangers and deciding the potential benefits weren't worth the risks. International regulations might eventually emerge, treaties establishing guidelines for dimensional exploration, penalties for unauthorized timeline breaching, protection for alternate reality species that found themselves displaced into this timeline. The Pokemon League would need to decide how to handle the Paradox Pokémon population in Area Zero. Should they remain confined to the crater, prevented from spreading to other regions? Should trainers be allowed to catch and transport them freely? Or should Paradox species require special permits, acknowledging their unique origin and potential impact on local ecosystems? Should breeding programs attempt to establish stable populations, or should these creatures remain unique individuals unable to reproduce? Their presence in this timeline an aberration that would naturally resolve itself when they eventually died of age? These weren't simple questions with obvious answers, and different regions would likely develop different policies based on their values and priorities. The most disturbing possibility was that other dimensional nexus points existed beyond Area Zero. That Crater in Paldea wasn't unique, but merely the most accessible or most studied. If dimensional barriers grew thin in multiple locations across the world, if Terastal energy was merely Paldea's local expression of a more universal phenomenon, then Paradox Pokémon might appear anywhere given the right conditions. Other regions might have their own versions, their own species pulled through from alternate timelines, their own researchers pursuing dangerous experiments in cosmic connectivity. The multiverse could be crowded with explorers, all of them poking at dimensional barriers, all of them risking catastrophic breaches in pursuit of knowledge or power or simple curiosity. Area Zero represented humanity's first confirmed contact with the multiverse, the first indisputable proof that reality extended beyond this single timeline. The implications would reshape philosophy, science, religion, every field of human endeavor that grappled with questions of existence and meaning. If infinite versions of reality existed, what made this one special? What obligation did people have to alternate timeline versions of themselves or others? If you could theoretically access timelines where loved ones who died in this reality still lived, should you attempt rescue missions knowing they'd face the trauma of leaving their own world behind? If resources were scarce here but abundant in alternate timelines, did you have moral justification for taking them, effectively stealing from your other selves? These questions extended to Pokemon as well. The Paradox species pulled into this timeline hadn't chosen displacement. They'd been grabbed by the professor's machine, pulled from their native realities into an alien world where everything worked slightly differently. Did they have rights? Did anyone have obligation to return them if possible? Or had they become refugees entitled to protection and support in their adopted timeline? The fact that they couldn't breed meant they represented one generation populations. terminal evolutionary dead ends, unless someone developed technology to restore their reproductive capacity or transport them back to their origins. Was either option ethical? The professor's vision of a paradise for Paradox Pokémon took on tragic dimensions when viewed through this lens. They'd imagined a world where ancient and future species could coexist peacefully, where the impossible became reality through scientific achievement. But they'd never considered whether the Paradox Pokémon wanted to be there, whether being pulled from their native timelines constituted salvation or kidnapping. The aggressive Koraidon or Miraidon that killed the professor might have been angry not about territory but about displacement, furious at being ripped from its home timeline and forced into an unfamiliar reality. The first, gentle specimen might have been merely resigned to its fate rather than genuinely happy. The professor assumed their vision aligned with the well-being of their subjects without ever confirming that assumption. Standing at the edge of Area Zero now, looking down into those crystalline depths, you carry all this knowledge with you. You've witnessed obsession and redemption, sacrifice and healing. You've met the professor before their fall, unable to warn them because the timeline demanded those choices be made exactly as they were. The clouds still swirl over the great crater, hiding the luminous world below. The Pokémon League maintains its restrictions, but you know the truth now. Area Zero isn't just a dangerous location. It's a wound in reality, a nexus where timelines intersect, where the impossible becomes routine. You could be one of them, the obsessed. You have Terapagos. You understand the principles. You could open new rifts, explore other timelines. The temptation exists, will always exist. But you've seen the cost. You've watched Arven confront his parents' death, stood beside the AI as it sacrificed itself to correct mistakes it didn't make. You felt the weight of Terapagos' power. The forbidden truth of the Paradox Pokémon isn't just that they come from alternate timelines. The forbidden truth is simpler and more terrible. We are not alone in the multiverse, and every choice we make echoes across dimensional barriers. We cannot control those echoes, cannot save alternate versions of ourselves from the mistakes we've avoided in this reality. But we can choose how we act in the timeline we inhabit. We can learn from the professor's obsession and the AI's sacrifice. We can use power responsibly. We can remember that every discovery carries cost, that the pursuit of knowledge without wisdom leads inevitably to tragedy. Area Zero will outlast us all, will continue existing long after current researchers die. The crystals will continue growing, fed by Terapagos' power. The story is ultimately about ambition and its consequences, about the thin line between visionary and obsessive, about a researcher who sacrificed everything for a goal they achieved too late to enjoy, about an AI that chose ethics over loyalty, about a child who grew up alone and found strength to forgive. You've walked through crystalline caverns where reality bends. You've caught Terapagos, witnessed bootstrap paradoxes, faced mysteries beyond comprehension. What you do with that knowledge remains to be written. The great crater stands at Paldea's heart. The depths glow with crystalline light. And you, trainer who descended and returned, carry the weight of secrets that could change the world or destroy it. The crater doesn't offer easy answers. It offers only itself, beautiful and terrible, forbidden and irresistible, waiting for the next person to descend and emerge changed. Area Zero is patient. The crystals glow. The Paradox Pokémon wait. And the multiverse stretches in infinite directions, every timeline a story, every possibility both real and unreachable. This is what you found at the bottom. This is the secret Heath died discredited trying to share, that the professor died celebrated trying to exploit, that the AI died forgotten trying to contain. Now it's yours, this terrible, beautiful knowledge. That's the forbidden truth. That's what Area Zero means. The crater is a door, and behind the door is everything, every possibility, separated from you by nothing more than dimensional barriers and human wisdom that hopefully prevents you from opening doors that should stay closed. You were there, you saw it, use it wisely.